American voters are kind of stuck with a choice that they would rather not have. They'd rather have a sort of a younger generation of leaders in many cases. On the other hand, these are the candidates they chose through the primary process, and that's what we're left with heading into November.
G7 summit of world leaders, which ended yesterday, actually achieved more than warm words this year. An unprecedented $50 billion, or £39 billion, seizure of Russian assets to aid Ukraine. But The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, writes this morning that that's not what Puglia 24 will be remembered for. Instead, the focus is once again on the lucidity, or indeed lack of it, of President Biden. One insider is quoted as saying that while the president showed sharpness during some meetings, he also appeared to display a troubling loss of focus and indeed concentration. Another, described as a seasoned diplomatic source, says it's the worst he's ever been. Well, let's speak to James Politi. He is Financial Times Washington bureau chief. He's in Italy covering the summit. Good morning, James.
Hi, good morning.
Do you agree with that assessment that President Biden really was struggling?
I don't think there was any sign of that from some of the officials and sources that I spoke to over the course of the summit. Of course, age is an issue in the presidential campaign. It's a political vulnerability for him, but I haven't heard any expressions of concern from sort of people involved in the summit over the past say 48 hours.
And that's really interesting because Harry Cole, writing in The Sun, does quote several sources that he's spoken to that said there were discussions around the fringes of the summit about President Biden's mental capabilities. And even if you just watch the video footage yesterday of when the people with the parachutes came in with all of the flags and the leaders were standing there watching them come in, I mean, President Biden did turn around. He looked distracted. He kind of shuffled away towards those parachutists and away from the leaders. And it was actually the leader of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, who had to guide him back, almost like you would guide back an elderly relative. It was difficult to watch.
Yeah, President Biden, he does have a kind of a stiff gait and definitely walks slowly. I think in this case he was actually watching a parachutist. So sort of on the normal video frame, you would have seen that, but some of the videos were cropped and you didn't see that. So it looked like he was kind of wandering off aimlessly, but that's not the case. We had a reporter on the ground also who saw it.
I've watched the full video. I've seen the wide shot, and you're absolutely right. It is clear that he is going over. It just seems like a slightly odd thing to do when all of he actually had his back to the cameras and everything when all of the other world leaders were there, and there were looks of concern between sort of Rishi Sunak and the Italian Prime Minister of kind of what is happening here. I'm really interested though. So your assessment is you don't think this is an issue. You think President Biden is doing absolutely fine?
No, I think it's an issue. Age is an issue in the presidential race. A large share of voters would rather have someone younger on the ticket, including some Democratic voters. So it's been a problem that's been dogging him politically in the United States, certainly. And of course, he is slower. He walks kind of more stiffly for sure. But I don't think that there's kind of overwhelming signs of an issue with mental capacity.
That's really interesting because obviously you talk about age. I mean, Biden is 81. We know that Trump is 78. I mean, it's only 3 years. But I mean, the clarity with which they seem to conduct themselves does seem to be quite different. We do know, of course, there have been a number of gaffes, difficult moments in recent months. Critics would say that's down to Biden's ability to focus and to concentrate. What would you put those down to?
Well, I mean, definitely, you mentioned former President Trump. He definitely has had some his advancing age has also been showing on the campaign trail. And so I think that, generally American voters are kind of stuck with a choice that they would rather not have. They'd rather have a sort of a younger generation of leaders in many cases. On the other hand, these are the candidates they chose through the primary process, and that's what we're left with heading into November.
He has, of course, President Biden, agreed to go and do some head-to-head debates with Donald Trump. That will be a test for him, won't it? Because if nothing, I mean, it'd be a test for a lot of people, to be honest. To be there, often they're kind of like 90 minutes. They are intense. They require a lot of concentration for anyone. But for a 78-year-old and an 81-year-old, that in itself is going to highlight things to the electorate, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a really important moment, the debate. And we had debates 4 years ago, so this is a rematch of that. This particular debate is coming earlier in the campaign than it had been 4 years ago, and I think it's going to sort of crystallize both some of the issues in the campaign, but also matters of age and character and how both candidates perform. And I think that in a race that's kind of neck and neck at the moment, and hasn't really moved in terms of the polling, it could be sort of a very, very critical inflection point.
James, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time this morning. That's James Politi, who is Financial Times Washington bureau chief. He's in Italy covering that G7 summit. Some of your messages coming in here, quite interesting. Tom says that Biden video has been discredited. It's been edited and cropped to create the effect, but the original shows him going to speak to a parachutist. You're absolutely right. I've seen the original video. He does. But I think the point being, it's the way he shuffles off. There is a look of concern. If you look at the faces of some of the other leaders, there's very much a look of Georgia Maloney, go and sort this out. She goes over and guides him back, very much like you would guide back an elderly relative. And also this comes within the context of all of the other gaffes and moments we have seen in recent months. If this was an isolated incident, then maybe people wouldn't read into it. And the bottom line is, Harry Cole is there, just as James Politi is. They're clearly speaking to different people, but some people at that summit do have concerns.
Yeah, Flavio here says, failure of the Democrats and the left to replace Biden and justify his erratic behaviour at all costs is criminally stupid and will win Trump the election. Quite extraordinary. Flavio says he's from Italy, where the media is openly mocking what he describes as the senile President of the United States.